Jeff Konenge live here at Citizen Television. What a great conversation we're having about BBI. Priscilla Nyokabi, a commissioner at the National Gender Equality Commission. Right next to her, Dr. Alex Awiti. He's the Vice Provost of Aga Khan University. Right next to him, Dr. Collins Odote, lecturer at the University of Nairobi. And on the far end is Charles Kanjama. He's an advocate of the High Court. Thank you so much, guys, for staying on. Great conversation. Dr. Awiti, you were saying in the break, there was a lot that was left out in the initial draft. There's a lot...
Yeah. Well, so I think a lot of those were some of the initial suggestions around, say, for instance, Kiswahili as a national, as an official language, and part of it speaks to the whole idea of language becomes a unifying force that begins to engender a sense of social cohesion and a sense of purpose of unity, and that then would relegate English as the second language. The proposals around, as our friends have pointed out, going back to the Boma's aspirations of 14 regions, for instance. So I think it was interesting to see the level of consultation and compromise that then created what I think is something that presents a starting point that Kenyans identify with from jump and does not create the initial tensions and the backs up and like, I don't see myself in this saying and this is too radical, etc. So I think on the president's part, I think that kind of leadership to create a consensus document from jump is commendable.
But Dr. Odote, you were saying, I mean, there are so-called regional blocks out there. I mean, there's the forming on their own, almost voluntarily, but there are blocks out there.
Yes, there are. There are actually regional economic blocks. We were just talking during the break. Lake Region Economic Block, I think, is one of the farthest with 14 counties. I think the chair is still Governor. No, the chair actually was Governor Paranya. I think the last I had was supposed to move now to Governor Nyong'o. But it has all the way from that place. It has Kisii, it has Bomet, it has Nandi. Wow. I think the difference between that and what was originally being thought about by some people is this is a regional economic block, number one. Number two, this is voluntary. So there are no additional resources, there's no additional power structure. That what was being talked about was a different layer of government. And the debate was, if you have a governor who's elected, these guys at the regional level, who are they going to be?
They'll be regional premiers.
Are you going to and they have their own regional bureaucracy, they have to allocate the money. And I think the conversation about, we want to reduce the cost of government, we don't want to increase the cost of government. Right. I think those are part of the concerns. But in terms of pooling resources together, it makes perfect sense to have regional blocks.
Yeah, but Priscilla,
as long as they're economic and as long as they're voluntary.
But does it make sense for Nyerians to form a regional block with Kiambu?
And a voluntary one, we are okay.
I don't think so.
And a non-political one. Yes. You know, the census just came out, and Kiambu has 2 million people, Nyeri has 759,000. We would never produce the regional governor. So then we are very careful about that. But then also, remember, the counties have identities, they have culture, they have, you know, practices and all that. What I'm personally liking about the regional bloc is the economic nature of it. Joint railway, we particularly in the central region need the railway, the Nanyuki line to work. We need joint roads, Nyeri Nyandarua, Nyeri Kiambu. The roads we can do roads together. So that's fine. Problem is election. But then I like that the report has become very realistic. It has saved all the 290 constituencies and all the 47 counties. Otherwise, we would have had a very, very bad debate about whose county is going and whose county is remaining. Even the Lake region, if you try to put a headquarter in that Lake region, you will see the drama you have never seen. Does it go nearer the lake? Further from the lake? I mean, it's just too much trouble just doing the politics. But the economics, the joint markets, for example, for coffee, the joint hospitals, the regional referral hospitals, that's been our debate about the regional hospitals, because you need surgeons and other specialized services at one hospital that can serve the region. You can't have a referral hospital in every county. Now we have county referral hospitals that don't even have an X-ray machine. They don't have any medicine. They don't have any experts. That doesn't add any value. What we need is a regional referral hospital with services. So there's a lot of good in the regional economic blocks. But I like that they are voluntary. Although the good thing with law, sometimes you start out voluntary, but if you realize it's a good thing, nothing stops you from legislating and giving it money.
Maybe even universities one day, Dr. Alex. I'm sure you'll agree with that. But let's switch gears, folks, if you don't mind. Charles, let me ask you this. Corruption. It's always been the dragon in the room, the elephant in the room, and you know, efforts to curb corruption. Well, you know, it depends on who you ask. 5% now for whistleblowers? 5% of recovered proceeds?
I think there's a similar provision in Nigeria. And every time they have a change of government, yes, you find some whistleblowers blowing their whistle effectively. There have been challenges that some whistleblowers never get the 5% of the proceeds. So sometimes you have corruption even in determining who was the actual whistleblower. So you need a lot of dynamics on that issue. I think the idea behind whistleblower law and reward for whistleblower is a good idea. It's a noble idea. Is that citizens should speak out when they see public resources being misused, being misappropriated. The question always is how will you implement that whistleblower law, and will people be allowed to blow? Are there untouchable people in government that you cannot blow the whistle against? Yeah. I think those are some of the things that the devil is always in the details. That the details will need to work out. But in principle, with the amount of money lost through corruption in Kenya, based on various reports from all kinds of agencies, it may be a good starting point.
But protecting whistleblowers, Dr. Odoche, that'll be difficult, huh? That'll be very difficult.
I think difficult is not impossible. And I think that's the spirit for me of looking at the things, that we can try and we should try to protect whistleblowers. I think even in terms of the other offenses, there's a mechanism for protecting witnesses. And I think, yes, we've had challenges in the country, but I think there's trials out of it. But I think, Jeff, if you look at the fight against corruption, I think whistleblowers is just one and the 5%. There's another innovative one, which goes to what Charles is saying, which is to accept that, you know, there are certain people, like you're talking about two things, there are certain people that may be difficult to prosecute. And they single out three categories of people. They single out lawyers, they single out judges, they single out politicians. Priscilla belongs to two categories.
2 out of 3.
Yes, and they say that for this category of people, prosecution we will try, but you may not be successful in all instances. Maybe let's also try what they call sting campaigns, where essentially you're being set up, you're being in the public domain. So I think for me, and then there's the element of let's disclose even lobbyists. And we're able to know who is this who's lobbying, so that we can then see that if Priscilla is the one who's lobbying for this thing, how come when government X comes, she's the only one getting tenders? And I think the idea is let's do all we can to ensure that this pervasive effect of corruption is addressed and addressed once and for all.
Yeah. Public servants, there's a conflict of interest with the, you know, being a part or dealing with any business with government. Well, is that going to be possible, Priscilla? Is that going to be possible?
Yes, I think that undoing the Ndegwa Commission report, we've had that report since the 70s, and it's been really, really a problem. That you can sit here, allocate money to a project, and then come around and do business with the same project. That's been really, really wrong. I think that to have the bold, and you know, there have been attempts, I think there have been other reports recommending removal of the Ndegwa Commission rule that allowed public servants to also do business with government. I think now with the fight against corruption, it is time to have public servants just remain public servants. If you are in business, you do business. Because now, one of the things that is hurting our economy is the confluence or congruence. The politicians are also the businessmen, are also the leaders, are also everything. So let us have businessmen and private sector, and let us have politicians and leaders on one side. And that way, you have a bit of accountability. And that's why our economy is not working very well. Because the people who are making rules, I mean, if you came to our parliament sometimes when budget is passing, you're just in shock. Everybody is just protecting a particular line. And that's the entrepreneur budget that we have. So now, when you remove that interest, now we can have a budget for water without the procurement in our mind. We can have a budget for health without the procurement in our mind. But now we have a budget, we have procurement for health with our conflict of interest. So that Ndegwa report must first go. And you know, some of those things were the ones we are saying don't even need the constitution. We don't need a referendum to undo what the Ndegwa report did.
You know, to support Priscilla, a friend of mine once told me that nowadays when budget is being passed, you see people with their iPads and they're very quiet. But when you touch some line of some road in Asumbi, say, no, Mr. Speaker. And you're like, wait, this guy was quiet all along. What's happening? Kumbe,
all of a sudden.
And that is
interest.
Yeah.
Or even and that interest is not of interest of people that they are representing.
No.
Their interest inside that parliament. So it's both the politician, but it's also the road contractor.
Although I want to also say this, the Public Officer Ethics Act, it's 2003. It's already 16 years old. Chapter 6 of the Constitution, the Leadership and Integrity Act, already prohibits conflict of interest. How come they are not effective? So we have both statutory and constitutional prohibition of conflict of interest. We even have criminal law provisions, including the Anti-Bribery Act, Anti-Corruption, and Economic Crimes Act. How come they are not effective? So I think we need to interrogate deeper because I feel that the key provisions in the Ndegwa report have been gradually eroded away by statutory and constitutional changes, but somehow our culture has remained. And you find that politician who has an interest maybe in that road in Asumbi, as Dr. Odote is saying, he's not going to use his own company. The company that is doing that business, he's not a shareholder in that company, he's not a director. He knows it's wrong, but he has an interest. He's developed certain devices, legal and otherwise, to get his cut without being apparently a shareholder in the company. So how do we deal with that issue? I think I still don't know whether we have an answer to that.
So it's treacherous waters to navigate. Dr. Wheaty, let me ask you this. Public servants using public institutions. Today, traffic from Bagathi Way to Bomas of Kenya was a mess. Well, 4,700 SUVs, Prado, they said, because people just showing up, bodyguard, chase car. Come on, man. It's ridiculous. Now to convince them, your children are going to go to public school now. You're going to have to go to Kenyatta National Hospital.
I know. Skin in the game, as they call it.
Yes.
I think it is a very good proposal. And our brothers down south to the western border, Magufuli has done it. When his wife was taken ill, just a few months after he became president, she was taken to Muhimbili Hospital. And the president, there's several pictures that we've seen of the president visiting his wife at Muhimbili National Referral Hospital. I think if, for instance, you're a minister for education and you get on the podium and you're preaching quality, equitable access to education, you're a minister for health, you say you're talking about universal access to health, you're talking about medical diagnostics, you're talking about primary health care, you're talking about best care that any Kenyan can get. And yet, when you're sick, you get on a plane and leave. I think that really bleeds hypocrisy. And it reflects a dereliction of duty at the highest level. How do we get it done is a separate question. But I think the principle of it and the aspiration of it is noble. And what we might now do as a country is how do we hold our leaders accountable to these commitments? And as you've seen, many parts of a lot of our problems are not necessarily legal or constitutional dysfunction. It is really about us. And when you look at some of the elements in the first chapter of the BBI, it talks about failure of parenting. It talks about questions around national ethos. It talks about a unified identity as a people. Diminish blood ties. Let's have common goals, common aspirations. Who are we about as a people? It's not that I'm Kikuyu, I'm Luo, I'm a Kenyan. And what does that mean? It talks about your country standing up for you. So as Colin said, 90% of what's in this document is really a call for us to step up to this noble mission and goal of citizen. I'm a Kenyan. What is it that binds me to this country, that makes me proud as a citizen, to not take public resources and put them in my pocket, to not take public resources that are meant for health and education, and then I take my child using those resources to the most expensive school in town? So I think this really, if the president is really committed, this could be one of his most enduring legacies, to institute a public ethic and a responsibility and skin in the game for public officials.
But like Charles Kinjama,
you make the bed, you lie in it.
Sure, but like Charles Kinjama says, the devil is in the details, folks. Let's face it. I mean, come on. Tomorrow, we'll be at each other's throats because we are Kenyan and that's what we do. We'll be at each other's throats. And I'm not being a cynic here.
You are being a cynic, Jeff.
This is not a
We're going to call you out.
Are we going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya all the way to 2022?
We should.
I think we should on the matters that have been raised, at least on finding the solutions.
You know, if
on solutions.
If the solutions were that easy, we would have done it many years ago. I think the solutions are not easy. And whoever thinks they are is being naive. But you know, we actually have no other country.
This is it.
And the problem is getting worse. So if we don't try, we could as well give up. Even this show, just let's go home.
And sleep.
Absolutely. We're even having this discussion.
Because we can't. We must
believe
try.
in this
But just also quickly, one other saving thing that has happened is also the leadership by the President and the Right Honorable Prime Minister. They've had to set their personal ambitions aside. I think that this is one sort of saving grace around all this thing. Otherwise, if you don't have strong political leadership from the front, like what they're doing now, it gets more difficult. Now, for the first time, we have strong political leadership. I think for everybody else, once that has been said, let's get down to doing the real work. Because another thing that is wrong with Kenyans is hoping that there are other people who are doing these things. We are all lawyers of our country and professionals of our country. Pick up an issue. Pick up the Health Service Commission, pick up the what do you call the money, the whistleblower, 5%. Because we need some laws, we need some bills. Of course, we're going to wait for the framework that they take. Do they take the committee of experts? Do they take a Bomas approach for further consultations? Or do we take a popular initiative? It's going to take some form of law. But even before then, a lot of these things need unpacking. I'm personally really supporting a roundtable for youth. There is a lot of attention to the youth concerns, and the youth were angry. They said today that the BBI process, they realized our youth are angry, our youth are excluded, the economy excludes them. The proposals sought, like land, is something that the youth don't connect with because they don't have any land. So they connect more with ICT. So I'm hoping that very, very soon, the President and the Prime Minister will call a youth roundtable where we thrash into some finesse, the proposals around youth and inclusion into the economy. But I'm hoping that we roll up our sleeves and just do the hard work because the answers are not easy. I've been trying to do some law on health, for example. The incubation period of a law sometimes is over a year to just get the consensus and get people to agree onto it. So it requires a lot of hard work. And one of the things I like today was sorting out the trust deficit because we mistrust each other so much. We write another law, we create another institution, we bring new people. That trust deficit, I don't know how we're going to resolve it. Even the Prime Minister's position is just another trust deficit issue. Otherwise, if you trusted the majority leader and the cabinet secretary we have, you don't need a new position. So that trust deficit is something we need to deal with, but also that we are now called upon to do some work. It was rights and responsibilities, and the professor said it correctly. We know haki yangu, not jukumu langu. Now jukumu ni sisi wote. Hakuna Wakenya wengine wanakuja kutekeleza hii, ni hawa tu.
So can I say that I would like to, I see two things that will affect the process of implementation because it's good that we are realistic. One is the politics of 2022. I think all the politicians will be going through this report with a fine-tooth comb to see, does this report and the alignments that may emerge from it, do they support my political aspirations or not? And the fact about politics is that politics involves contestation. So contestation will come. And the question is, will the contestation come during the process of arriving at consensus regarding how to formulate the specific policy proposals of the BBI report? Because if that happens, then that is a risk factor for the successful implementation of the report. Second, we need to identify those matters which you could call contentious issues because there are entrenched polarized views. And I think Priscilla mentioned one of them in passing, which is the question of the Health Commission. I have many friends who are medical doctors, including one of my brothers. And I know that the medical profession, the medical doctors, the nurses, etc., they would like, in fact, they don't know how they ended up in the counties. They would like to go back to having a structured national level, like the Health Service Commission. Yet, I also know that the county governors and the county infrastructure are so delighted with the fact that health is a county function. So there's now a compromise where you take the staff, you give them to a commission, which means at the national level, and you leave the counties with the facilities and the medicines. I don't think this is a matter that can be resolved as easily as has been proposed. They are very entrenched positions. It may require an amendment of the constitution because it's affecting the objects of devolution, which includes health. So I think we need to start drilling deep behind into some of these recommendations and identifying those which will face challenges in implementation. I do agree there is a software of improving our culture and interaction, trying to reduce ethnicity, but we have to get to the stuff of which laws are made, because that is the stuff that is used to build a society, the institutions and the laws. And I'm saying that at that level, there's still quite a bit of discussion and dialogue to be had, and the way ahead is not as smooth as would appear from the initial very welcoming acceptance of the BBI report.
That's why I said this is not a kumbaya moment. But Dr. Odoto, you said this doesn't require a referendum. So what's next then? What do we do other than hold hands? I mean, it's like buying a new pair of underwear. It feels good on your body, but who's going to see it once you cover it?
Jeff, several things. I will talk about the underwear, but
take a moment to think about what I just said.
But several things. The first is I actually think that sometimes we confuse two processes. We confuse constitutional reform vis-a-vis solving the problems that affect this country. I think for me, this process was about constitutional reform. It was about identifying and solving the problems that afflict this country. It is for that reason that I think there's a lot of run to a referendum or no referendum. Because the difference between this, for me, and the Punguza Mizigo bill, the Punguza Mizigo is actually a constitutional bill. This is a mix of many things. And we need to then identify, so how do we take each of these things forward? And that's why the conversation is important. Some of those things will require change of law. Some of those things will require change of policy. Some of those things may require change of constitution. And if it's change of constitution, you can go to a referendum, you may not go to a referendum. I think what the process, in my view, should contemplate is, as opposed to worrying about are we going to a referendum or not, first let's agree what's the solution to the issue. Once we nail the solution, there's nothing impossible for this country. Even if the solution requires us to go to a referendum, we will go for it.
Sure.
If we go back to 2008, Jeff, at the brinks of the precipice, because that's the title of the book by Kofi Annan, after he came out of the process, we changed our constitution in almost a day in Parliament and created the position of
Prime Minister.
There was never a referendum, but there was determination. In my view, if there's determination, we can even decide, but these are the things we'll go on a referendum. We've agreed on them. Now let's just wait, maybe, for 2022 elections, and as we go through our politics, put this issue. Let's assume we want the Health Commission to be a referendum issue. I don't think it is.
I also don't think it's a health issue. I don't think the Health Service Commission is a referendum issue.
Let's assume we think it is and we make it a referendum. We can say, okay, here are the two proposals on it. It will be a question, for example, we don't have money. It will be a question in the 2022 elections as part of it. Do you see that we have agreed on these are the options? We're just now waiting to effect it. What's much more important is first to have the determination that we want to solve this problem.
Yeah. Dr. Witi, 2022, does this affect it at all, or is this long term now?
I think all of the people who had jitters and anxieties about how this might inject itself in 2022 are going to have a new awakening when they spend time to read this and realize that this is not about perpetrating Mr. Odinga's political career. President Kenyatta has no ambition to persist in government. I think it resettles the conversation to just what it was in 2017 about Deputy President Ruto has made it very clear that he's interested in running for presidency. The field doesn't change. The political architecture and the governance architecture has not changed much at the level of the presidency, with the deputy president and the president. There's a prime minister who comes from parliament. We're just basically creating a hybrid. So I think in terms of any alignments, I don't see any ethnic coalitions forming. I don't see any political formations that are basically angling in a different way from what we've seen in 2013 and 2017. So I think what I think is that the political discourse is stable. The anxiety was fever pitch last night.
Yeah.
Until everybody read this and they said, oh my God, it's not what we thought it was. So I have a very good feeling about this. And as Colin says, we have a will. We are determined to move the conversation forward. And we're running out of time. And this is the only country that we have. We must put our shoulders to the wheel and move this forward. Keep the boulder going uphill, even if it is 1 inch a day. Collectively, 47 million people, we can do it.
Someone described it as a pressure cooker. That's what we do. We fill that cooker with pressure, and then we let off a little bit of steam.
Yeah.
And then we move on. I'm going to ask you, all of you, closing thoughts, starting with you, Priscilla Nyokabi. Closing thoughts going forward for this country.
I think also just quickly on the 2022 is to ask that we do this fast.
Between now and then?
Between now and 2022, let's get done with the BBI. Not everything, but some parts can be done. So it is possible to do 3/4 of it now and just leave 1/4 of what might require more time. But even if there was a referendum, there's still 3 years to 2022. There's still enough time. If we move with haste, and all the things there is no time. These problems are the pressure cooker that you just mentioned. I mean, the health crisis in our country is not something that we don't know about. So if we could do this fast and then push 2022 to 2022, now we are doing 2022 in 2019. Can we let 2022 be 2022? That would be more useful. But also just to say the team did a good job, and I think that Senator Haji's team has given the country a well thought out document, a consensus document. I think kudos to them. This document is not divisive at all. If there will be divisions, it is not because of the document. It will be because of other reasons. And I hope that what was said today applies. Let's push the politics too much later. Let's deal with the solutions that we need here. And for the women gains, I think to push for more. They gave us the deputy positions in the gubernatorial. And we're also wondering, why not at the national level?
Absolutely.
Why not at the national level? I mean, women are ready. So can we also have a president and a running mate who are of opposite gender? Can we have a speaker and a deputy speaker who are opposite gender? So we are really looking forward. Women are ready. GBV is covered and well covered, the issues there. So we are excited about the report and excited about the implementation and worried that it should not get captured. Even if there's going to be some politics, please not around the BBI report. I think the BBI needs to be insulated. And we now need, we might need a team of insulators. I'm worried about whether Senator Haji's work is now done. The Tanzanian minister called it kikosi kazi. Hiki kikosi kazi, mimi nitaomba, I think, kipatiwe kazi ya kuchunga. Here document.
Charles Kunjama, closing thoughts.
I think the real issue is the roadmap from where we've reached today. We've started reviewing the document. Kenyans had a lot of hope in 2010 when we enacted the new constitution. We seemed to have a clear roadmap, and it's clear 9 years later, the hope has punctured. And I think we've gone through these cycles of having a lot of expectations in a document or a process, and then being disappointed a few years later. So for me, it's just to strike a note of caution that the professionals amongst us, members of civil society, we have to remain keen, we have to remain on our guard. Sometimes they say that when politicians agree on something, then is the time for the professionals and civil society to pay keen interest. Of course, we do know that the BBI report has really good desires and goals, which is unity of Kenyans. But we need to interrogate those provisions, because what we want to avoid is that cycle of every 10 years or so getting excited in a new document, in a new process with its legal aspects, changing laws very rapidly, sometimes even without sufficient scrutiny, because there is a sense of political consensus. And then the blowback starts coming a few years later. So I think we'll be interested in scrutinizing the roadmap, the process. And also there were some criticisms from civil society, some parts of civil society, about the level of participation by the members of the public in the initial BBI report. I think we should also remember that there were many people who did not get a chance initially to give their views to the BBI report. As we go forward to the implementation process, we need to take care of the public participation element, because that is ingrained in our constitution. And I think if We take care of all those issues. We do not fear to confront, compromise, accommodate one another on issues that may have a bit of contention. Then we will be going in the right direction.
Yeah. Dr. Collins Adote, closing thoughts going forward.
I think the next 18 months are critical because the report talks about an 18-month implementation period. We should use that 18 months, first, quickly to determine a roadmap, secondly, to start implementing those that we can implement, and thirdly, to discuss those that require discussion. So that because the 18 months, if you count, end just a year to the next general election, meaning that there is an appreciation that that year for general elections, you can't do much.
Right.
So we need to ensure that we spend time building momentum around this.
Is it possible?
I think it's possible, but it requires us to roll up our sleeves. It requires, for example, Kanjama and myself, to start asking ourselves, and Priscilla, as the Law Society of Kenya, when are we having the conversation on the things that's required to be taken forward? So we don't wait for politicians to come and start implementing this process. I think as the process started, there's a lot of leadership that was left at the top. I think we must take leadership as citizens and move this discussion forward and say, yeah, this is okay. Let's have, for example, guys in the health sector starting to discuss the health commission, because there's been a lot of discussions. Now there's a proposal, so how does this operate? How do you satisfy governors and then satisfy health professionals? Then you can be able to come to the country and say, here is something that works. Let's have the guys that work on anti-corruption starting to say, these are the issues, these are the things, how we think we can roll them out. Let's look at the people who work on education. What are the education proposals? We're supposed to be having ethics consideration. Yeah. So if we do that, then by the time that there is that national conversation, the different sectors have already distilled issues and we are moving forward. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Just a small point on the bottom-up. Actually, this report requires a bottom-up approach. It appreciates we've been doing top-down all along. Now it's time for bottom-up.
Yeah. Dr. Alex Owiti, you get the final word.
So I think, Jeff, I've never been more proud of my country and my citizenship as a Kenyan. And I think I go back to the preamble of the Constitution, we the people. I think this was a we the people moment in terms of galvanizing a set of issues that can catalyze vigorous, open, honest public conversation on 9 key issues that we think are critical to moving this country forward. And what I think now we should try and do over the next 18 months is how do we expand the conversation beyond the political architecture of governance to the issues that Priscilla talked about that I outlined in great detail in the BBI report. The youth feel left out. Questions of shared prosperity. Those things are central. And they're basically the questions that permeate all of these other issues that trouble us, including inclusivity, a sense of negative ethnicity, because it's again about shared resources and the perception that certain groups of people have more than their fair share. So I think going forward, how do we get the youth around the table to talk about the issues that deeply affect our country? The structure of the economy, shared prosperity, the debt questions, fiscal management, financial governance, talking about is devolution really working? And those questions are asked in the BBI. What is the architecture and the capability of devolved units? We see issues around nepotism. Even though we talk about tribalism as a big issue here, go to some of these counties. It's about clans and it's about regions and where you come from and et cetera, et cetera. And it's so interesting that they can even pick among themselves. They know which clan you come from by just looking at you. And these things play out in appointments and all of that. So we need to go back in there. Is devolution really working? How do we make this much more efficient? We'll be getting a revenue flash into these places, 35%, for instance. How are we going to manage these processes? I think it has to be a much more joint conversation. We just had a conversation during the break on voluntary economic federation, regional economic blocks. These things make sense, bottom line, in terms of just the volumes of produce that you produce. We talked about central Kenya and coffee. How do you go to these big coffee markets, for instance? We talked about the central regional economic block. We have Eastern, we have the coast, etc. So how do we move towards a joint CADP process to start rigging the infrastructure that stitches our counties together, but also then cements this social and cultural cohesion that we need? So I think this is for us, the people. And as Charles Kanjama said, we can't step back and basically say this is just another report and a euphoric moment for us. We, the people, must own this process. We must walk it to the last mile.
Yeah. I think it was in 2003, Kenyans were voted the most optimistic people on the planet.
I was actually about to complain to him that this is not the time you're the most proud. We were most proud in 2003, so this is actually the second time.
No, for me.
We were also proud in 2010. This is the third time.
Yeah. Alex was probably 3 years old then. So. It boils down to what JFK said in his inauguration speech in 1961. You all know this. Ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know that statement is not the same words? It's in the report.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. In Kiswahili,
when he's talking about responsibility, it says, but a lot of the times we actually only ask what the country can do for us. It's time to start asking what we can do for our country.
And to stop celebrating the corrupt. Remember, this document actually says we have all fallen short of the glory. All of us are criminals. It's not just the politicians.
It's criminal.
Not criminal ile way. Criminal in the sense of we're also not doing the right thing. Can we not be corrupt where we are? Absolutely. Can we give service where we are? So it calls a lot of introspection on Wanjiko. Wanjiko, Atieno, in fact, that was the language. Fatuma, Cherono.
It boils down
the PC,
to you,
yes.
and you.
Yes,
it's about me.
Yes, so don't just point fingers to the leaders. It's also some fingers must be pointed
Absolutely.
up to Wanjiko. So it's a common process for all of us.
Priscilla Nyokabi, Dr. Alex Awiti, Dr. Collins Adote, Charles Onjama, thank you so much, guys. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I hope we can continue. Like you said, 18 months is not a long time, but it can be done.
It's true.
It can be done. It's up to you. Thanks so much for being a part of this great conversation. Let's take it forward. At bottom line, we have no other Kenya to go to. Like the panelists said, this is the only country we got. What you doing about it? Think about it. Remember, every Wednesday, it's all about those 3 letters on the keyboard that follow each other. JKL. Right here on Citizen Television. Thanks so much for being a part of the conversation. Good night. Good luck. God bless this great nation of ours. Thank you.